Hi, I'm going to start today by asking you a question. Who taught you to be a moral person? Right, parents, right? Who else? Teachers, ministers, friends, just about everybody you knew when you were growing up, probably. These are all the people who contribute not only to the way we understand our values and our own moral behavior, but also to our love system. And the way we maintain our love system is partly through our moral conscience. And moral conscience, I believe, is a born capacity that all human beings have. And how we live that out depends on our love system. So the language that we use to talk about our values and the things that matter to us, the ways that we learn to connect to people, what are the right behaviors that help us maintain love in our life, those are all part of the way our conscience works. So it's really, really important in every human being's life that their moral conscience be able to guide them to maintain a good and supportive love system. So what happens if you do something, or something happens to you, or you witness something that so challenges your moral conscience that you can't make sense or meaning of it, and your sense of who you are in the world and what you love is profoundly challenged? That's what we call moral injury. And for military veterans, that kind of life experience that challenges what you thought you knew was right, or challenges your sense that you are a good person, or that you can trust people because they do the right thing. When those things get challenged, it can be devastating. And for many veterans, that's combat. Because even though there are rules of engagement for war, there's a lot of chaos in war and things can break down. But you don't have to have been to war to have your moral conscience challenged. There's lots of forms of harm and trauma that can happen to us outside the field of a battlefield. So in our program, Resilience Strength Training for Veterans, we do things that try to help people recover from their moral injury. And one of the first things we do is we ask them to make a map or a mask of their military face. So these masks that you're looking at right now were made by people in our program. And as you can see, they are a complex mixture of a lot of feelings. I see in these masks profound grief. I see in these masks harm, violence, confusion, maybe remorse. Those are all feelings associated with moral injury. And when we ask people who have come to our groups who want to work on their moral injury to make a mask of their military face, this is often what we see. All these layers of ambiguity, also some goodness. And people also learn important things in the military that they value, but it's mixed also with harm they may have done, betrayals they may have experienced, and losses they may have had to go through in the military. So our program, Resilience Strength Training, is designed to help veterans process moral injury. And we begin, first of all, by making the group itself veterans only. Because for a lot of veterans, talking about worse things they have done or experienced isn't easy because they don't believe that civilians will understand. We don't understand military culture. We don't understand necessarily the experiences they've been through. So we design our groups to be peer facilitated by other veterans, and we train the facilitators on how to run the groups, but the facilitators themselves are members of the group. And the first thing they do is form a squad. They are asked to form these group of strangers who come in isolated by their moral injury. Because one of the things that happens with moral injury is because you feel so terrible, you hide that part of yourself that you think people won't understand, or that you're ashamed of, or that you feel guilty about, so they won't be able to see it. I've had veterans say to me, I thought if I shared this, people would never love me again. And if moral injury is key to if moral conscience is key to our love system, then it's fierce to have moral injury. It's a challenge to our basic sense of being worthy of love. They've also said things to us like, well, I've been in therapy for several years, even 7 years, and there were things I told in this group I would never have even told a therapist. So we know there's really importance to the trust that veterans have with each other. So we form a group of veterans. The facilitators tell them to make up a squad name. They introduce themselves to each other. They create ground rules for how they want to operate their group. And then they learn special practices of breath control and meditation and spiritual practices that help them manage all those painful inner emotions, because that's going to be really important later as we move them through trauma processing. And then they make their masks, and then they talk about their masks, and that begins to open up stories and questions. And as we move through 30 hours of the program, we have writing exercises, art projects, in various ways. We invite the veterans to share their moral injury stories. And sometimes they're not from the military. Sometimes there are multiple stories from childhood forward. So they share, and because we've taught them the spiritual practices about helping themselves to calm down, it's a skill they use when they listen to other people share their pain, because we're all empathetic human beings, and we can get so caught up in somebody's emotional crisis that we get wrought. And so we teach the facilitators and the veterans themselves how to self-regulate so they can stay with the listenings, this compassionate listening that doesn't judge, that just receives a person's pain and story as a gift. And we do that for about 30 hours. It's pretty intense, takes several days. And eventually, as they process the trauma, they really feel that amazing euphoric release you get from going through all of that pain and finally letting it go. And that's a kind of dangerous moment, because a person can kind of get addicted to that high and want to tell their story over and over so that they can get the high. So we help them learn that that euphoria is actually part of the trauma itself, and that the next step is to get to calm and equilibrium. So for another 30 hours, for half of the time together, they work on talking about, well, what did they used to believe and what do they believe now? What did they used to believe that didn't work for them, that got them into this space, and what can they put together now as a meaning, moral foundation system that gives them life and helps them integrate what happened to them, not forget it, but integrate it as part of their life story, but not the only thing that matters about them. Because that's what happens when you're carrying that kind of pain. It sort of defines your life. So that partly they're free from that pain and they can now reflect on it, think about it, and move forward through the process to a place of hope, looking forward, leaving the process by reconnecting to people in their love system and to a world where they feel of value and feel worthy of love. So that's the end of the RSD process. And this is one of our groups. Of course, this is a Bristol-Myers Squibb funded program, and it's a pilot that ran for just about 2 years, and we studied it. It's an evidence-based program. We have surveys they take at the very beginning as a baseline, then they take survey 1 that's at the very end of their time together, and then 6 months later they take it again to see how they're doing. Did it really hold up for them, or did they slide back down into the abyss that they were in when they came? And if you look in the bottom row of this picture, to the person kneeling in the blue, if you can see him, his name is Mike Nierenbinchek, I think it is. Mike came to us after he'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan, and then when he was ordered to deploy his 3rd time to Afghanistan, he broke down. He just couldn't go. and so he was discharged. And then he spent about 12 years, I think, addicted to drugs, in and out of treatment. He got married. He had a very supportive wife who would just wait patiently for him when he didn't come home for weeks at a time. And he says that he finally kicked heroin because he realized he didn't want to die. And so he was able to get off the drugs, and then he realized he needed to move from where he was to a new environment. So he ended his marriage and he moved from Philadelphia to Los Angeles to start a new life, and had become a born-again Christian and remarried and had a daughter, a young daughter. And he was at that point in his life, so he had made steps for recovery. And he came into our program married with a young daughter, working as a youth minister at his church. So the results that Mike got are on this chart. This is some of our preliminary data from the surveys that they take. And Mike is very clear he benefited a lot. And a lot of the veterans tell us that, but we can also see this in the numbers. We can see this in the surveys that they have filled out. And you'll see that they go up in their self-esteem and their optimism, and interestingly enough, in religious involvement. And there are a number of studies that say that sometimes as people recover from moral injury, they often do get more engaged with religious questions or religious communities, or with prayer or meditation or some other kind of spiritual practice that helps them manage their lives better. So these are some of our results from our program. And the last group took their survey in October of this year, so we're just a few weeks out from the end of that. And so our research team at Texas Christian University is busy crunching all the final numbers, but we think just from the anecdotal evidence and the things that the veterans tell us that the numbers will be good even for the final bit of this. So some of the main points I'd like you to remember from this is I believe we are born moral, and that's why moral injury is such a devastating thing. It goes to the core sense of who we are, and it disrupts our love system. And our love system is crucial to our morality. And then moral injury is not a disorder. There's not a diagnosis for it or a treatment protocol, but it is a very profound kind of suffering, because we've lost our humanity and we're fighting with our experience. So it's like our conscience is attacking us because the experience we had that we're trying to remember doesn't make sense, and our conscience wants us to make sense of it. So you can't have moral injury unless you have a working conscience, and I think that's also important to remember. That people are basically good who are struggling with moral injury. And alleviating it and repairing humanity, helping people reassemble their humanity and find a sense of meaning and purpose in life saves lives. We know that from people in our groups who have talked about their own suicide attempts and have taken a pledge not to die by their own hand by the time they end the program. So we're heartened by the results we see. And this is a picture of our training for new facilitators in the program. This was the last training we did in early May of this year. And so you'll see some of the people at the BMS Summit are here in the picture. They'll be there. And you can see that there are a lot of happy people who went through the training. And right in the middle is Mike. I don't know if you recognized him, but that's the same Mike that was a youth minister and married and had a child when he came into our program. And about 3 weeks after this picture was taken, he went to Los Angeles from New York. He lives in Los Angeles. He'd come to New York to do this training, and he was invited to be on a panel to talk about this program at a conference on moral injury that we had in May in Los Angeles. So he spoke about how much he had benefited, how much it helped him be more aware of how he was feeling and sharing things that had happened to him. But he brought his wife and daughter with him to hear him, because he was very proud of them and what he'd learned. His wife pulled me aside at a break in the conference, and she said to me, "You need to know how much this program means to me." She said, "When Mike came to you, he was so impatient. He couldn't play with our daughter hardly at all. I knew it just was hard for him. And he seemed angry a lot, and he wouldn't talk to me." And she said, he came out of the program, he wasn't angry, he started talking to me, he now plays with our daughter and has fun doing it. She said, "I think this program saved our family." So even though Mike had made steps to recovery, he had a little further to go, and we helped him get there. And we're really pleased with that story. We hear stories like that from other families. We've had people in our program reconnect with members of their family they had lost touch with. We have a member who volunteers at a senior center 3 days a week to talk to the seniors who don't have anyone else to talk to. And he's really enjoying that. We've had other people. We had a participant who also who trained as a facilitator, who had been in prison for a while, 13 years, and made contact with a son he hadn't seen in 14 years to try to be a good father to him. And so now he sees his son regularly. And those are the kinds of behaviors we see and reports of behaviors we hear about from people who've gone through this program. So I just want to conclude by saying there are a lot of ways to help with moral injury. RST, our Resilience Strength Training Program, isn't the only one, but we do have data to show that what we do works, and we think it's been a life-saving thing for the 95 veterans who've gone through our program. Thank you.